Why can't you lose weight as a type 1 diabetic? Well, I think it's important to specify what exactly you mean. Weight can be any part of your body composition, so losing weight could mean that you're losing either muscle mass or bone density, both of which we do not want. So I think we need to specify that by weight loss, you mean specifically fat loss. For most of us, we want to lose body fat. Rather than saying weight loss, let's say fat loss. So why is it, or does it seem so hard to lose body fat as a type 1 diabetic? Well, in this video, we're going to cover some main reasons that I struggled with personally and that I see very commonly in my type 1 diabetic clients about why it might be that you can't lose fat. Now, these aren't necessarily all the reasons. It might not be specifically why you are struggling to lose fat, but this is what I see most commonly, so it could be the reason, or at least part of the reason why you might be struggling. I think it's really important to clarify something that I see all the time, which drives me mad, and that is people calling insulin a fat storage hormone, or that insulin makes you gain weight. Both of those are so wrong. That is such an incorrect way to talk about what insulin does. I just made an Instagram post on this actually because I saw it again somewhere on Instagram and it just makes my blood boil. So insulin is not a fat storage hormone. Insulin is a hormone that's like a key that unlocks the door to cells taking in glucose for energy. That could be muscle, that could be your heart, that could be liver. It could be fat, but insulin is not the thing that's making you gain fat. The excess glucose is, or sort of poor metabolic health and efficiency, not insulin. You can't gain muscle without insulin. You can't have energy without insulin. Your liver can't store glucose without insulin. You can't live without insulin. And a really big important factor to losing body fat and to keeping body fat off is your muscle mass. And you can't gain muscle without insulin. So it's not insulin that's to blame, and insulin is actually a really important factor in having the physique and the body that you want. So insulin is not the thing that's making you gain body fat. Insulin is just the hormone that opens the door into your cells, be that muscle, heart, liver, or fat cells. Okay, so insulin is not your enemy here. Insulin does not make you gain fat. So one of the first reasons why you might be struggling to lose fat as a type 1 diabetic is that your whole hormonal system is kind of out of whack. Maybe things are a little bit out of balance. This can be especially true if you've had quite a traumatic diagnosis of type 1, or you've had quite poorly controlled blood sugar for an extended period of time. Now for myself, I was becoming really ill really gradually with type 1. Looking back, I know now that from about age 12 or 13 up until I was diagnosed at 16 years old, for that 3 or 4 years my blood sugar was obviously running very, very high, and I was very ill for that period of my life, but no one ever checked my blood sugar, so we didn't know until bang the day I wasn't making any insulin anymore. But for those 3 or 4 years where I wasn't making enough insulin and my blood sugar was running really high, this messed up my hormonal system. I then really struggled with my menstrual cycle and all my female hormones. I really struggled with my circadian rhythm, so the sleep-wake cycle. I obviously had really high cortisol, stress levels, probably quite high adrenaline as well. I was in a really bad place hormonally, which had a knock-on effect on pretty much every other area of my well-being. So it could be that actually your hormonal system is really unbalanced. It could be that your menstrual cycle is just really not happy. So think about it. Are you dealing with lots of PMS? Are you dealing with lots of mood swings, lots of cravings? Do you feel like half the month is kind of okay and then you spend a whole half of your month feeling really terrible? That shouldn't be like that necessarily. That's an indication that your hormonal system is struggling, is crying out for help. Another thing could be that cortisol or stress system as we know it. If your cortisol levels are too high, which is really common these days actually, it can be linked to having lots of high and low blood sugars. Those are a stressor to your body. That can cause higher levels of cortisol. High levels of cortisol are also very linked to belly fat and visceral fat, so the fat that's internal around your organs. And if you generally live a very stressful, very go type lifestyle, you feel like you can never actually unwind. You feel like Even when you're trying to relax, you're just sitting down, you try and switch off from work or your responsibilities, and you feel like you can never fully disconnect and relax, truly relax, maybe that's an indication that your cortisol is a little bit out of whack, which can again be really contributing to why you can't lose fat, possibly why you can't lose muscle if that is also a goal, why you feel tired but wired all the time, and why it just feels like you're putting in all this effort to reach a goal and you just feel like you're not getting anywhere, you're just treading water, or if anything, you're going backwards. And then, of course, there's the 24-hour hormonal cycle, so our sleep and wake cycle. Again, cortisol is really tied into that. That's why we have dawn phenomenon. That's why we can see our blood sugar creep up in the morning. Could be about from 5 or 6 a.m. That's because we're naturally releasing cortisol to wake us up. Again, no hormone is good or bad. We need cortisol. We wouldn't be alive without cortisol. No good or bad hormone, just imbalances. Really think about all these hormonal systems, what they're telling you. Are things happy and balanced and going quite smoothly with minimal symptoms and struggles? Or are you struggling to sleep, you're dealing with PMS, you've got mood swings, you've got cravings, you don't feel good, you feel tired but wired, you feel fatigued? What's your body telling you about those hormonal systems? Really have a think about it. If you're in that not so good place, maybe that's why you can't lose fat. Now, another massive area of why you might be struggling to lose body fat and build your physique is because of your skeletal muscle and your healthy muscle mass. As type 1 diabetics, we deal with high blood sugars. That is just part of being a type 1. No matter how good your control is, there will be times of high blood sugars. It's inevitable. However, if you're spending too much time with high blood sugars, this is a very catabolic state, which means it breaks down your lean tissue, i.e. your muscle. Now, if we don't have enough muscle mass, one, we lose our glucose storage because glycogen, the stored form of glucose, most of that takes place in our muscle mass. About 80% of our stored glucose is in our muscle. Our muscle is our biggest area of glucose disposal. So without enough muscle mass, you're likely to be very insulin resistant and you're likely having a hard time just having an efficient system. The more muscle you have, generally the better your metabolic rate, the more efficiently your systems can work. So that again ties back into your hormonal system and everything that's going on there that could be either supporting or sabotaging you. And going back to type 1, again, if we're not managing to get at least about 70% time in range blood sugars, we're gonna have a really hard time hitting any goals, whether that's losing fat, gaining muscle, both in the long run, performing well in the gym, performing well at sports, if that's something that you do, or just generally feeling good in day-to-day life. That's going to be very hard if our blood sugar isn't managed well. Now, it used to really irritate me as a type 1 diabetic when I was labelled as having poor control, because I spent every waking moment trying to control my blood sugar and getting nowhere. It was the worst time of my life. And I put in so much effort just to always have high blood sugars and then constant lows as well. I was on that constant roller coaster. So in saying poor blood sugar management, I do not mean that you are managing it poorly, because I know that you're probably putting in every scrap of effort and energy that you can. This is really a system thing. I feel like the medical system is letting us down badly. With the right information and how to apply that information, you can achieve that 70 to 80% time in range. Of course, as type 1 diabetics, we need to put in the effort to manage our own illness. It is our responsibility to control it, but you can't just magically know the information when you become type 1. So yes, half of it is you putting in the effort, but the other half is that you need to be given that information, and very rarely are we given that information. So just kind of wrapping up that whole muscle mass thing, we need muscle mass regardless of whether we're type 1 diabetic or not. All people need healthy muscle mass in order to have efficient and healthy fat loss and to maintain that fat loss. And again, our muscle mass could be more at jeopardy as type 1 diabetics because our high blood sugars are catabolic. So really focusing on building that healthy muscle via resistance training. And then the next thing could be quite surprising because we're talking about fat loss, is that actually you're not eating enough. Or maybe you are eating enough, but not enough of the right things. Generally, people will cut calories and cut their food as a way to lose fat. It's still this unfortunate mindset of calories in, calories out, which is not correct. Our body is a very complex organism, not a black and white machine. So although calories have their place within the broad picture, they are not the be all and end all. Just cutting your food out ties back into that other point of muscle mass. If we're constantly not eating enough, we're constantly trying to eat less or in a deficit, then we are most likely going to lose a significant amount of muscle. Generally, when people cut their calories and they just keep them cut, they tend to lose roughly the same amount of muscle as fat. And of course, unless you resistance train, you're not going to put that muscle back on. And then you've created a worse metabolic situation where you've gotten rid of your lean tissue, so your metabolic rate is lower. And actually, that's why then people tend to gain more fat than they started with. We want to be really, really careful with how we cut calories. We don't want to just go about it willy-nilly. We need to make sure it's programmed and done in a very specific way for a very specific time period. And this needs to be even more carefully done as women in tune with our menstrual cycle. So actually making sure that you're eating at maintenance calories is of vital importance. It's also really worth pointing out that as type 1 diabetics, we can have a harder time absorbing nutrients from food. We can be lower in nutrients than non-diabetics. And again, if we're eating less, we're not getting in the nutrients that we need. That sets us up worse hormonally. Our hormones rely very, very much on the nutrients we get from food, as well as just the basic macronutrients. So you can see how all of this is tying in. Not eating enough, we lose muscle. We also lose the nutrients and macronutrients we need for hormone production and balance, and all of those things can then start to tie into why you can't lose fat. And then of course, I have to touch on that point again of your type 1 diabetes just isn't controlled well enough. Again, this is not necessarily your fault at all. I used to put in more effort when I was a teenager than I do now, but I was basically never in range. Now I maintain an 85% plus time in range pretty much all the time, even though I feel like I'm putting in a lot less effort. That is because I know what's going on inside my body chemically, hormonally, digestion-wise, everything like that. And I understand how that interacts with my insulin needs and what it's likely going to mean for my blood sugar. That can sound extremely confusing at first to think, oh my God, how do I learn all of this? How do I know all of those things? It just seems so complicated and overwhelming. It does feel like that at first, but I promise it becomes very intuitive. It's just like anything else in life, it's just something that you've got to learn. Things feel really complicated and overwhelming at first, but you just learn them and then they become something that you do more habitually and more intuitively. You don't necessarily have to overthink those things to do them. And that can be how your type 1 management can become. It can get to that point. So really, if you're not achieving 70% time in range right now, don't worry, none of us did when we first started, but really, really start to aim for that 70% plus time in range. So think back to those previous points. Are you resistance training? Do you have a really good amount of muscle mass on your body? Are you eating to fuel that muscle mass, to build that muscle mass, rather than to keep cutting it and losing it? Are you thinking about your hormones? Are you protecting your hormones? Are you dealing with lots of PMS type symptoms and all those other awful struggles that we talked about? Or are you doing things in your day-to-day life that actually look after your hormonal system? And then when you achieve that 70% time in range, I think it's then really, really important to aim for 80. That might sound completely out of the realms of possibility right now. It absolutely did for me once upon a time. I would have laughed in your face if you told me that I would consistently achieve 80% plus time in range, because honestly, I don't think I was even at 20% time in range once upon a time. If that sounds ridiculous to you right now, it did for me once, but now that's my norm. So there's no reason why it can't be for you as well. And to get that 80% time in range plus really is knowing all of the details about your menstrual cycle, the type of exercise you're doing, whether that's going to drop or rise your blood sugar, time of day, a 2 and 24 hour rule, as I call it, macro balances, so depending on whether you've got a high fat, high protein, high carb meal, it's knowing how all of those things influence your blood sugar, and then how you need to manipulate your insulin around that and manipulate maybe some other factors like your carbohydrate or your protein or your exercise. It's knowing how to manipulate all of those things and predict all of those things in that intuitive way so that you keep yourself in range. Again, can sound really overwhelming, can sound like how the hell do I do that? But it's something that we can all learn as type 1s, and that is what we do inside Thrive, my coaching program. We go through everything step by step so you can learn it in a really easy, digestible way. And the girls in Thrive, they start sometimes, well below that 70% time in range, and within weeks they are consistently above 70% time in range. I promise you, myself, my clients in Thrive, we all get to that place where we're achieving these numbers and these goals, and it absolutely really is possible. And another important thing of why you might not be losing body fat and seeing those physique goals is maybe you just don't have the right plan, the training and nutrition plan. Maybe it's nothing to do with your type 1 diabetes, and actually you just don't have the right plan. We can see that non-diabetics really struggle to lose fat and to get into shape and the physique that they want. So maybe it's nothing to do with your type 1 at all. Maybe you just don't have the right exercise regime, you don't have the right nutrition plan, you're just not really sure what you're doing with both of those things. And sometimes there's other factors that contribute into this, so it might not all be your type 1 at all. So just really recapping that, those are some reasons that I see really commonly, that I struggled with myself, that I see my clients struggling with, why you might not be losing body fat with type 1 diabetes. So your hormones, your muscle mass, eating enough and eating enough of the right things, keeping your type 1 diabetes control as tight as you can, and making sure that you have the right plan for what it is that you want to achieve. So let me know in the comments which one you think you might be struggling with, if some of this was really news to you, if it was quite eye-opening in some way. I'd love to know what your thoughts are about this. If you would like more information, and if you would like to become a Thrive client so that you can achieve these amazing blood sugar time and range and fitness results as well, please click the link down below to fill out a very quick form, and then I will be in touch with you very quickly after that. It would be great to hear from you and see you in the next video soon. Subscribe for more type 1 diabetes content.